صباح النور. افتكر سامعيني مش كده؟
ايوه صح.
صباح الخير يا دكتور.
صباح النور، صباح النور، كيف الحال؟
دكتور كيف الاوضاع بمصر على موضوع الكوفيد؟
والله ما في على موضوع الكوفيد، مش كده بتسألي؟
ايوه سمعنا في موجة جديدة وجايين اعداد كبيرة عم تتزايد بمصر، صحيح الكلام ولا لا؟
والله بيقولوا انه في تحذير من موجة رابعة للاسف، لكن ما في اشارات محددة كده يعني بانه
اوكي
يفترض يحصل ايه. ما في اغلاق، ما في اي توجيهات محددة لسه.
اوكي جود، ان شاء الله ما تشوفوا شيء.
اهلا دكتور جمال.
دكتور جمال وحشني.
محمد علي، دكتور محمد علي، ازيك؟ الحال؟
مرحبا، صباح الخير للجميع.
صباح الخير جميعا.
صباح الخير، صباح الخير لكم جميعا. شكرا.
Okay. Let's start. Okay. Dear colleagues, experts and esteemed audience, I would like to welcome you to the launch of the joint ESCWA ILO report towards a productive and inclusive path, job creation in the Arab world. The agenda of this discussion will be as follows. A welcome speech by Dr. Rula Dashti, the Executive Secretary of UN ESCWA, a welcome speech by Dr. Ruba Jaradat, Director of ILO Beirut Regional Office, and finally we're going to end it by a presentation by the writers of the report, and eventually we're going to finish the discussion with esteemed experts on the report. Dr. Dashti, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salim. Scholars, experts, and colleagues, good morning, everyone. It's with great pleasure that we are launching the report entitled Towards a Productive and Inclusive Path to Job Creation in the Arab Region. In the past decade, the working age population in Arab countries has been characterized by stagnant labor force participation, high unemployment levels, and limited decent employment creation. In 2019, before the COVID-19 crisis, more than 14 million Arab individuals were jobless. Youth unemployment was over 25%, the highest worldwide, and informal employment was estimated at over 65% of total employment in many Arab countries. The pandemic has further intensified these challenges. Today, almost 39 million employees in the region are at risk of losing their job. All these factors are exerting pressure on policymakers to propose more effective methods in the short run and to reinforce structural transformation efforts in the medium and long terms. This joint report by ESCWA and the ILO Regional Office for Arab States examines the fundamental reasons behind the endemic failure of Arab economies to generate sufficient jobs. In particular, it focuses on the limited role of the formal private sector in providing decent employment opportunities and offers specific policy solutions to address labor market deficits in the region. The report focuses on the demand side of the labor market and highlights the gap between capital owners and income earners in production. It also reveals that, notwithstanding the regional acceptable labor productivity levels, total factor productivity and employment elasticities in formal private sector firms are lower than in other countries with similar income brackets. This implies that the formal sector has structural problems affecting its competitiveness, owing to various factors related to technology, production infrastructure, and most important, overall governance quality. The report also finds that innovation has a various impact on employment creation, as it affects various sectors differently. In some cases, it can lead to more employment generation, but in others, it may lead to the opposite. This implies that we must be mindful of the potential negative impact of the fourth industrial revolution and of harnessing its opportunities. Lastly, the report's demand-side analysis underlies that gender inequality in employment in the Arab region is significant, demonstrated, for instance, by few women in top management positions and a lower share of female business owners. On the policy side, the report presents key recommendations, among which reducing labor market deficits, particularly in the formal private sector, to unlock its potential as a major catalyst for economic growth and decent job creation, especially for women and young people. Also, it addresses the Arab states should also create incentives for labor formalization to ensure decent employment. Finally, solidarity among Arab countries is indispensable if they want to recover from the effects of the pandemic, boost economic activity, and create sufficient decent job opportunities that offer prosperity and hope for people in the region, particularly the young generation. As our ILO colleagues repeatedly say, decent employment is the surest way to prevent individuals from falling into poverty and to reduce inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dashti. Dr. Ruba, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Rula. Before the meeting started, we were discussing the deteriorating working and living conditions in this country. But despite that, the ESCWA and ILO colleagues, they managed to continue to deliver, and this report is a very good evidence that about the dedication. It shows the dedication and commitment of colleagues to to continue to deliver and serve the constituents in the region during these very difficult times in Lebanon. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is really great pleasure and honor for me to be here today for the official launch of the report towards the productive and inclusive path job creation in the Arab region. I would like first to take the opportunity to express my deep appreciation to Rula and your team, Dr. Rula, for the highly fruitful joint collaboration between ESCWA and the ILO, and also the commitments of our two agencies. The report we are presenting to you today is an important report. It sheds light on the labor market deficits in the region, including in the formal private sector, and provides recommendations for an improved coherent policy response that addresses demand and supply side challenges. While these challenges have existed for years, the COVID-19 pandemic has undoubtedly exaggerated the situation. It laid bare the extreme vulnerabilities of billions of workers and enterprises and reinforced the pre-existing inequalities and decent work deficits. This has in turn triggered further vulnerabilities and fragility in the region. And as Dr. Rula mentioned, prior to the pandemic, more than 14 million Arab individuals of working age were unemployed, mostly youth and women being at greater disadvantage, facing higher unemployment rates and lower labor market participation. Informal employment characterized by poor working conditions has sadly become the norm, with an estimated 64% of total employment in the Arab region being informal. The overall job creation has been largely concentrated in low productivity sectors, unfortunately, that offer low wages and less than satisfactory employment conditions. Following the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, and according to the ILO nowcasting model, working hours declined in the Arab region by an estimated 9.6% in 2020, equivalent to 11 million full-time jobs compared to the pre-existing situation. And unfortunately, our region was among the least prepared for the pandemic, with many countries having already been in situations of extreme fragility and crisis before the pandemic hit. It is estimated that more than 29 million individuals in the region were working in sectors identified by ILO as particularly hard-hit sectors, facing high risks of layoff and reduced wages and or hours of work. The impact of the crisis has been particularly devastating for women, youth, persons with disabilities, informal workers, migrants, and refugees. The new realities have also hit the region amidst rising anxiety about the future of work and the uncertain unemployment and labor market impact brought by the advances in technology, demographic shifts, new employment relationships, and also climate change. That said, it is important that we confront these challenges and develop an action-oriented roadmap to advance recovery and construct a better future that delivers economic security, equal opportunity, and social justice. This is also in line with the ILO Centenary Future of Work Declaration, and also, and even more recent, we have a call to action that was adopted anonymously in June 2021 at the International Labour Conference, which outlines measures to create a human-centered recovery from the pandemic and avoid long-term scarring of economies and societies. This is, of course, not to say that the countries in the region that have not taken action. On the contrary, Arab governments, in collaboration with workers and employer organizations, have made good efforts to respond to the crisis, in line with the ILO's four-pillar policy framework that focused on the need to stimulate economic activity, support enterprises, jobs and incomes, to protect working people's safety and health, and to rely on social dialogue for solution. Notwithstanding these efforts, certain gaps persist, both in the immediate response of the crisis to the crisis and also in the long-term labor market development. Also, as Dr. Rola mentioned, the joint ILO and ESCWA report that we are launching today aims to close some of these gaps by providing a clear set of recommendations based on a detailed analysis of the labor market situation in the region and the realities of the private sector, including with regard to its ability to create decent and productive jobs for the growing working age population in the region. The report is clear on the need to develop comprehensive strategy that aims to deliver human-centered agenda. In the current circumstances, we are really we really need a renewed and enormous commitment from all of us, policy advocates, policy and decision makers, governments and workers and employers organizations, to work together and do whatever it takes to build back a better future for all. Increased focus on both the quality and quantity of jobs created is also key. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that reforms are urgently needed in our region. It is only with the right mix of policies, the right coordination frameworks, and the effective involvement of all relevant stakeholders, especially workers and employers, representatives, that we can ensure successful recovery and effective transition towards a more inclusive future of work. I look forward to an interesting discussion around the findings and recommendations of this study and an open dialogue with the relevant experts participating in this meeting today. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jaradat, for the speech. Now we're going to move to the presentation. Can you see my screen? Okay, so I wanted to pick up from Dr. Jaradat talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that the labor markets in the Arab world has overhanging issues and still pending solutions. However, the COVID-19 pandemic came to exacerbate the deficits in the labor market, which entails us, and this is what we try to do in this report, entails us to look at the labor market differently, where we didn't focus solely on the supply side, but we also extended to the demand side analysis, specifically in the formal private sector. And on top of that, we looked at the role of technology and innovations in job creation, which sets the stage for us at ESCWA for our analysis on the fourth industrial revolution and the future of work. First, let me start with some dragging issues that are still pending in the region. We are not over the youth bulge yet. If we look at the age pyramids in the Arab world, we see that the base of the pyramid is still growing, and at the same time, the working age population is growing as well at the same time, without forgetting the age brackets for the youth, which is significantly growing as well. In a simple calculation that we did with our colleagues at the ILO, we found out that if we wanted to reach the accomplishment of the 2030 agenda, by 2030, this requires 33 million jobs if we wanted to bring the unemployment rate down to 5%. However, we thought about it that the labor force participation rate for females is still low. So if we increase labor force participation rate to a level that matches global averages, implies we need 65 million jobs for this case by 2030, if we wanted to keep the unemployment rate at 5% or drop it to 5%. What's the situation with labor force participation rate? We can see that on average, labor force participation rate is decreasing, and it's decreasing significantly among the youth and females. However, women in general, the labor force participation rate increased by 1%. This was not translated into additional employment, especially for women. We know that the labor force participation rate increased by 1% between 2000 and 2019. However, unemployment for females increased by 3.5%. We also expect, due to the pandemic, that unemployment rate, and especially for youth and females, might increase if new policies are not set in place. The COVID-19 pandemic came to compound pre-existing labor market deficit. And as Dr. Jaradat mentioned, that just for the sake of example, on the third quarter of 2020, 13% of the working hours has been lost. This is equivalent to 15 million jobs in the Arab region. And also, as in general, 39 million of the Arab employees are at the risk of losing their job or having worse working conditions due to the pandemic. The informal sector is still a big elephant in the room, and this is due to no economic and institutional governance, limited formal employment, formal sector employment, weak incentives to formalize, and the presence of the low value adding activities which people opt out after searching for a long time for a decent job. So we thought, provided the limited policy space of many Arab states, what is more sustainable than the formal private sector to find decent jobs for the Arab population? However, this comes at some challenges if we look at the characteristics of the formal private sector. The first issue that, or the first challenge that we looked at is we looked at the wage share and the capital share in the Arab region. And we compared it to other countries with similar income brackets. We saw that countries in the Arab region has a lower wage share compared to countries with similar income brackets. This and a higher capital share. This bias, if it continues, it will if the bias will continue towards higher capital intensity, and then higher capital intensity will lead to lower wages, and eventually the gap between wage and earners, which is employees, and capital owners is going to increase, boosting inequality in the region. If we look at the capital and wage share in the region, we can see that the wage share is inversely related to the firm size. In this sense, we figured out that big firms or large firms has significantly better technology, more profitable, and at the same time might be connected to political elites that might give them an additional chance. We also looked at the total factor productivity. In the formal private sector, we have seen that employment productivity is comparable to countries with similar income bracket. However, the total factor productivity in many countries in the Arab region is low. And if we can see at the graph on your left-hand side, we can see that most countries in the Arab region has a total factor productivity, or the firms in many countries in the Arab region has a total factor productivity lower than their peers' income bracket. The only two countries that are having their firms with higher total factor higher total factor productivity than their peers is Tunisia and Jordan. We also have countries that are growing in this sense. We have Morocco, due to their structural transformation efforts. We see their total factor productivity is increasing between 2013 and 2019. However, Lebanon is regressing. Just a small note here, the total factor productivity is measured at the manufacturing sector just to mimic the Cobb-Douglas production function. So we looked at employment growth in the formal private sector. We have seen that on average among countries, employment growth is around 2%, and it drops to 1% in small and medium enterprises. This provides an alarming question here, is that we all push for small and medium enterprise sustainability. However, these firms are growing the lowest among other firms. And if we look at the countries, we see that countries in conflict and those who are under transition are those countries that are growing the lowest. Then we classified the employment growth in the formal private sector by sector. The main purpose of doing so is we look at the quality of growth, not rather than the quantity. We have noticed from the analysis that we did that the construction sector is significantly, the growth in the construction sector is significantly high in stable countries. However, it drops significantly or drastically when the countries it has political turbulence or in conflict. This, and to some extent, the tourism and the transport sector, we've seen that similar growth quality. However, employment and manufacturing is less susceptible to political incidents or economic incidents. Yes, the growth in employment or the demand for employment is increasing or decreasing, but at a lower magnitude compared to other sectors. This brings us to a conclusion that construction could be used as a post-conflict sector to boost employment growth and reconciliation, and employment for additional resilience. Manufacturing for additional resilience. We have also interesting results about innovations. We have seen that if firms innovate new products, or they have some innovation in the process, the manufacturing sector, construction, wholesale, and transport experience higher demand for employment. However, for sectors such as real estate and tourism, these sectors are impacted negatively by technology or by innovations. We show a decrease in growth or some negative growth in areas when we see innovations in these two sectors. Talking about elasticities, if we looked at the same Arab countries that we are investigating, and we look at the macro elasticities, we see that these countries has an acceptable level of elasticities, implies income is generating some kind of employment. However, looking at elasticities at the formal private sector, we have seen that the majority of the countries and the loan sectors has an elasticity less than 1. And if we look at Iraq, we could see that the elasticity is negative. This is indicating that most countries, their revenues are not generating the required employment that is needed. Only Morocco is having acceptable level of elasticities as far as they're comparing their revenues with the employment that is created. Also, the dragging issues in the region is still political stability, access to finance, tax rate, and electricity. These are the main issues that the Arab countries that we are investigating are facing in the moment. P17, please. So what are key policy recommendations? For the elasticity issue, review on labor regulations and policies and ensure a stronger and more competitive business environment to enhance elasticity. When it comes to technology, we develop, as we've seen from our slides, we need to develop sector-specific policies that tackle the impact of technology on employment creation, whereby no policy should be mainstreamed among all sectors, as we've seen that there is a distinct impact of technology. Also, offer additional incentives for private sector innovations with the focus on more labor-augmented technologies in production rather than substitution, the technology that is substituting employment. The COVID-19 and in the short term introduced stimulus packages, especially targeted at SMEs, in order to secure liquidity for the vulnerable firms, and also update policies supporting SMEs to sustain and grow in the medium and long term. And since we've seen that SMEs are growing the lower compared to other type of firms. Also focus on better quality education, deep skilling and reskilling, especially among the mid-skills bracket. And we have chosen the mid-skilled bracket because the majority of the employees in the Arab world has a mid-skill. And linking that to the fourth industrial revolution, we have seen that most of the skills that will be wiped out by technology is the mid-skills. So a reskilling and upskilling or a lifelong education is due in the region. And also, and finally, we look at the construction sector as in the short term after reconciliation in conflict-affected countries as a promising sector for additional employment and additional stability. Additional thought on employment creation for women. We do find in this report some promising sector. First of all, the Arab region is lagging behind other regions when it comes to employment creation in the formal private sector. Also, if we look at the firm size, we have seen that large firms are hiring more females relative to other type of firms. And also, on a side note, we found out that firms that has foreign ownership in it has a higher fraction of female compared to other firms. However, we have seen in general that the IT sector and related activities have the highest average female share of full-time employment in the formal private sector. When we talk about women in management and leadership position, also the Arab region is still lagging behind. Compared to men, it's only 4.5% of the females are in leadership or management position in the formal private sector, compared to 95% as far as males. And this is lower, significantly lower than other regions around the world. So what are some key recommendations? Some challenge gender discriminatory perceptions in labor market and capitalize on their increased level of education of women in all sectors. Support women entrepreneurs by providing access to credit and promote growth-oriented internship. And this is very crucial, as we know that most of females entrepreneurs are heading small enterprises. And we also know that these firms are growing the lowest. Adapt more remote working arrangement as a viable solution to improve women capabilities post the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is also viable for firms operating in politically unstable countries, where it gives us an option for females to have more politically stable conditions for work, and improve women's labor market prospects through challenging relevant socioeconomic cultural perception to allow women's labor mobility across all economic sectors. This is a key summary of the sectors, the analysis that we have done in on the demand side of the formal private sector. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague from ILO, Tariq, to give us the way forward and some additional macro level policy recommendation. Tariq, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Salim. Good morning, everyone. As we've seen throughout Salim's presentation so far, numerous challenges and bottlenecks have long hindered both private sector development and decent job creation in the Arab region. And this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated these challenges, meaning that we actually have to adjust our response strategies to take into account the pandemic's labor market repercussions, whilst also bearing in mind what, the path that we were following beforehand and what remains relevant from that. Next slide, please, Salim. So in this report, we propose a two-pronged approach that focuses on the one hand on a set of policy measures to respond to the impact of the crisis per se, the COVID-19 crisis per se, and on the other, a comprehensive set of policies that aim to maximize the creation of decent and productive employment, including within the private sector. In the immediate term, in response to the pandemic, countries are sort of encouraged to follow the four-pillar policy response approach of the ILO, which Ruba had mentioned in her opening remarks as well, which calls for, firstly, increased efforts to stimulate the economy and employment. Second, increased efforts to support businesses and enterprises and retain jobs and incomes. Third, measures to protect workers in the workplace. And finally, fourthly, measures to promote and increasingly rely on social dialogue for effective decision-making. Within this context, obviously the most vulnerable groups, including those in the informal economy, workers and enterprises, need to be more highly prioritized, as these groups are obviously at a greater disadvantage and require more special targeted support that responds to their needs and priorities. Now, beyond the immediate term, these four green octagons at the bottom of the screen on the slide represent the more broader reforms and policies to address the more structural labor market challenges that have predated the pandemic and that have existed for many years in the region. Now, obviously, with the exacerbation of the situation by the crisis, these have become even more urgent and more relevant today. First and foremost, we encourage countries in the region to develop comprehensive national employment policies that aim to address a wide array of policy areas affecting both the supply and demand sides of the labor market, as well as the intermediation between them. These policies help provide a comprehensive and clear policy framework for addressing employment deficits, both in terms of quantity, like levels of employment, unemployment, as well as the quality of employment. They need to comprise macroeconomic, sectoral, structural policies, as well as more specific labor market policies and institutions. And importantly, these policies need to be developed through dialogue and collaboration between all of the key actors in the labor market. By that, I mean governments, but also representatives of employers and workers. At the end of the day, top-down policy making by governments alone in the labor market has to have the buy-in of the key actors of the labor market, the social partners. Otherwise, we're not looking at a situation where we're likely to see success of this sort of policy making. On the demand side, we need to rethink macroeconomic policy. Salim, previous slide still. We need to rethink macroeconomic policies to create a supportive environment for inclusive growth and employment generating structural transformation. This needs to be accompanied by sectoral trade investment policies that can foster private sector and enterprise development and support the creation of decent and sustainable jobs in a productive and well-diversified private sector. On the supply side, reform of the education and training systems is needed to ensure provision of adequate skills that respond to the needs of the private sector. This requires a greater involvement of business and employers in curricula design and delivery, as well as more investment in career counseling and guidance, which are critical to alleviate skills mismatches, which are a strongly perceived problem on the part of employers in this region. Similarly, increased investments in well-targeted active labor market policies and effective public employment services can also help to address the challenges faced, especially by young people in the region. In parallel, given that employment challenge refers to both quantity and quality of employment, as I've mentioned already, we need to really focus on reducing decent work deficits, which are as important as those, the responses in this regard are as important as those that are aimed to support the level of job creation. And this is where we look at the role of social protection and formalization of economies, of labor markets, and the need for improved labor regulations and minimum wage policies to promote fairer and more inclusive labor markets in the region. And finally, as Salim was referring to in his previous section, the policies related to promoting gender equality and non-discrimination in the labor market really need to be accorded the highest attention right now, as increasingly educated women offer a strongly underutilized economic potential in the region. So family-friendly policies such as maternity protection, provision of childcare, etc., would greatly help to address gaps in female employment and labor force participation. And they can also promote productive and decent work for women in the region. Next slide, please. So some final thoughts from my side, in terms of the way forward. It's clear that the prevailing development model is unsustainable, a state-led model that much of the region has pursued. And this necessitates a rethinking of policies and strategies and an increased focus on international labor standards to address challenges related to the lack of decent job creation, precarious employment, and social deprivation, amongst others. The current dichotomy between the low productive private sector, which is unable to create sufficient decent jobs for the growing labor force, and the overstaffed private sector, public sector, has to be resolved. And this should be done in a way that effectively reinforces the complementarity between these two sectors and emphasizes the critical and important role that the private sector can play in creating decent and productive jobs. So a more inclusive development model is really what's going to be needed to address growing levels of unemployment, inequality, and vulnerability in the region. Now, such a model has to take into account new and changing realities. A changing world of work. Dr. Dashti has talked about the fourth industrial revolution. The changes are not only limited to changes in organization of production and work, but there are also changes in employment relationships, climate change, the impact of globalization and new technologies in employment and working conditions, and changes in demography, aging populations in parts of the region as well, amongst others. Now, while we've seen that increased reliance on technology leads to new forms of employment and provides job opportunities for an increasing share in the labor force, technological changes and some of these other mega trends in the years and decades to come are expected to have an even greater impact on jobs and decent work, which will result in a mixture of some job creation, some job destruction, and also workers' replacement. So while more flexibility and opportunities for remote work and other non-standard forms of employment are being and will continue to be created, the overall impact on the quality of work as a result of these changes does remain a concern. What really needs to happen is that policies need to be put in place now to actually ensure that these new forms of employment will provide decent working conditions in the future. Rapid shifts towards non-standard forms of employment arrangements, such as the platform or the gig economy, have undoubtedly created a lot of employment opportunities, including for other previously marginalized segments of society who have entered the labor market and are engaged in productive work. However, a lot of the jobs that they do in the platform economy are often characterized by weaker worker protection and representation. So well-crafted policies which are designed to promote fundamental rights at work and ensure decent work in the future are key. That's what we're calling for here. A big focus on skills development and lifelong learning is also going to be needed to ensure the preparedness of individuals for the new world of work. So with those final thoughts from my side, I'll hand back to Salim or Khalid, if you'd like to add some final thoughts from your side before we hand over to our experts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarek. I'm going to give the floor to Khalid Abu Ismail, my colleague Khalid Abu Ismail, for final thoughts about the report, and then we move directly to the discussion. Khalid, please.
Thank you, Salim. May I have the mic? So, good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to also thank and acknowledge our co-authors, Aya Ghaffar and Manuela Nama. Who Aya is from the ILO and Manuela was an ESCWA consultant while we prepared this report. And I think that the report does have a significant value added to the whole debate about employment generation. And certainly, compared at least to the 1990s, where the debate started, I think, in the Arab region with a lot of countries going into economic reforms, and I'm sure Dr. Ibrahim al-Badawi will recall many countries in the region at the time while they were negotiating their economic reform programs with the World Bank and the IMF. The story, I think, was oversimplistic. The story at that time was that if you were to undertake certain macroeconomic stability and structural adjustments at the time, reforms, then the private sector would take the burden of employment generation from the public sector, which at the time had reached its limit. And if you open up your markets and you do your trade liberalization and your investment deregulation, etc., and governance reforms, then you'll be able to have a higher value added, higher export content in manufacturing goods, and etc., etc. Now, going into the 2000s, 10 years after this debate, clearly that didn't happen. It didn't happen in any Arab country, actually, maybe with a slight exception of Tunisia. And so the question then in the 2000s was, why didn't this happen? Was it a supply side problem or was it a demand side problem? And we went into that debate, I think, which was in my opinion, at least, it was kind of an oversimplistic debate, because at any given point in time, you're going to have both supply side and demand side problems. But I think the debate was which one of those played the larger role. I think post 2010, there was a general consensus that in most countries, and especially in middle income countries, the demand side issues were crucial. And I think with this report, we make a significant contribution as to the manifestations of private sector performance that help explain this characteristic of employment, but not decent employment, of the fact that we have certain problematic structural features that prevent the private sector from fulfilling the narrative that we saw. But there is one missing question, which I'd like to pose to everybody, and especially our discussants. Why is it? Why is it that the private sector has these figures of total factor productivity? Why is it that we have these low employment elasticities? Why is it that the private sector has responded the way it is? And I think there's one telling graph that we saw about the obstacles that are, confronting the private sector. And of course, political instability has shown. But I don't think that by itself is enough for us to understand the complexity of that question. And I personally think, and we've said this repeatedly in many other publications in ESCWA, that unless you go into the political economy narrative, and unless you go into the incentives and disincentives that are facing the private sector, both in the short term and the long term, and here you have to nuance and take into account that we have a very diversified region, we will not be able to answer this question. I think this question should pave the way for our future research agenda, both at the ILO and at ESCWA. And I'd like to close by posing the question to you, and hopefully that becomes the entry point for further collaboration between us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Khaled. Esteemed experts, kindly, if you wanted to raise a question or a comment, please raise your hand, and then we can go by turn. Jamal, I meant the virtual hand, So, yeah, Jamal, please go ahead. You're muted. Now you're unmuted. Still muted, Jamal. I made them go.
now? Can you hear me?
Yes, صباح الخير.
صباح النور والفل والياسمين. Thank you so much, Dr. Salim. Thank you so much, Dr. Khaled and Dr. Rola and Dr. Roba and everyone really who have worked, and Dr. Tariq, and everyone who have worked on this report. Really, I want to congratulate you on this great effort. It's definitely a contribution for someone who is interested in working and learning more about the labor markets and job creation in the region. And definitely while reading the report, it helped me understand a little bit more. So I want to start from where the report ended, basically from some of the recommendations. So I just want to make 3 points. On each of these points, I will highlight what it means, and I want to say how it may work and provide some evidence regarding it. I want to few of the themes that were mentioned in the report around one certain theme, which is about the role of interventions. So if we think about the education and skill mismatch, if we think about the labor force participation and about the formalization, now definitely these problems are existing everywhere in the region, in every country. But what I see is a little bit missing is what kind of interventions we can do in order to reduce these challenges. So if we think, for example, about the education and skill mismatch, I would like to provide certain evidence that we are learning now in Saudi Arabia via some interventions there. So when we provide some information, small information to students, they basically are changing their decision on what to study. Just this information is about the labor market. So if you ask me what do you want to study, for example, in Lebanon, many people will tell you, well, I would like to do maybe engineering or medicine. But when you look at where the jobs are being created, definitely not in the engineering field and definitely not in the medical field. Forget about the last 2 years. A lot of jobs are being created in other areas. So, but these young people, when they are entering the universities, they are not really aware of these job creation prospects in the market. So when we provide them at the high school level with this little information that you have many jobs are being created there and they are paying good, but actually they are not the common jobs, maybe data analysis, maybe actuarial science, maybe statistics. These ones probably are, this kind of interventions are being missing. Another kind of intervention that's related to labor force participation. Again, I will use one example from Saudi Arabia using recent work that appeared in the American Economic Review by Leo Burstein and others. Basically, for example, the women, why they are not working. You find over there in the country and in different countries, women are basically doing better in schools. They are performing better. They are going to the university. They are performing well in the university. They graduate with degrees, and then you don't see them in the labor market. And when you do some more investigation about that, and what we learn is basically, it's not about the economics, it's about the culture. It's about the social factors, it's about the norms. And then basically you ask the woman, you ask the man, why is your wife, sister, daughter not working? And they will tell you, well, actually, because other men, my peers, would look down at me when they are doing that. So basically the intervention, when you provide them different information that actually your peers would look up to you when your wife or daughter or sister is working and is a high achiever, then basically this is a change about their willingness to accept the people. So this kind of intervention, to what extent really we can do it in other countries to really change behaviors, to change norms, and the perceptions about the labor market. And that's something I would love really to see how we can and what we can contribute to. Also, the job creation aspect, I really like everything that's mentioned in the report, but I find something that's being missing about the role of monopolies, protections, cartels. If we think about the pharmaceutical product production in Lebanon, for example, more than 50% of the pharmaceutical product market is basically absorbed by 5 firms, importers. So huge monopolies, huge cartels. Why is that happening? Is it about people do not want to start pharmaceutical factories? Or is it because some licenses and restrictions? So some analysis or protections for certain people are needed maybe on this front as well. And then we along also along the lines of the educational skills mismatch, there has been a very beautiful tool, and I think the report touched a little bit on it, about the economic complexity, which is really different in different countries. Different countries are producing, and Khalid here hinted to, different countries are really producing different products. They are exporting different products. So here we are able to see when we are exporting, for example, certain products, and maybe we are very close to be able to export and have comparative advantage in other products. So again, maybe here I would need to focus the education, or focus the production, provide certain incentives to entering and growing and expanding in these sectors that a country has comparative advantage in, using the economic complexity framework that we are aware of. And then basically I would like just to think about what kind of additional work we can do using the big administrative data, and basically be able to catch up with some of the trends that are now followed in the US, in France, and other European countries, using Ministry of Finance data sets, using Ministry of Labor data sets, or the social insurance data sets, to be able really to cover all the labor market, not only the samples. But again, really, I think the report is really, really great, and I will be teaching economic development again this fall, and this report will be in the syllabus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haidar, for the great comments that you provided and the valid questions that you asked. I wanted to move to Dr. Ibrahim for his comments, thoughts, and ideas. Dr. Ibrahim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Salim. I wanted actually to start by endorsing the point that Khalid made, that things have really changed, and the state has a much more significant role to play. And this has been recognized actually since quite some time. I would like to say that actually one important developing technology in production processes and the interface, the increasingly strong interface between industrialization and services, is a new dimension that is actually becoming a reality in addition to the political economy and the constraints that crony capitalism and all these aspects that still afflict our societies and ability of our economies to produce jobs. Danny Roderick and his research associates have recently, or maybe I think about a research project that's probably started, I think if I remember correctly, in 2020, using large firm level data from Tanzania and Kenya. And they found what they thought, or at least Danny thought, was startling, that conditional convergence in manufacturing is no longer obtains. And that actually, what they found was that large firms in these countries have actually made significant inroads in terms of labor productivity and value added, but they created very little jobs. In contrast, the smaller and less productive firms were able actually to expand job opportunities, just exactly like what is happening in our region, in terms of that you have low productivity, informal economic activities are producing jobs, but very low productivity. And instead, the few high productivity firms, large firms, are actually managed through developing, service-oriented techniques and embedding themselves into the supply chain, global and regional supply chain, to increase productivity, but with not adequate job creation. I think this links to what you said, Khalid, in terms of that the state has to have a strategy for job creation, a technology strategy in this case, in order to not only to deal with the political economy and the basic constraints facing, getting licenses in timely timely period, these kind of things, which are the business environment constraints that are well known. They are still there, but I think there is even more daunting task, which is how to respond to the changing technological environment and its impact on industrialization. That is, I think, one key point that I think is important to consider. The other point is that I sit in a UN advisory board with very big names, and it's really a great privilege for me to be in these meetings. And I attended 2 meetings so far. And there seems to be a general consensus that the emerging role of the state would be the state that also provide, in addition to developmental states and all that, is to provide universal social protection. And the social protection is a huge agenda that also required collaboration with the private sector, and also expanding the role of the state in terms of and using digital transformations. So that actually, I think, as Jamal said, relates to what Jamal point, is that this will create new opportunities for jobs that are not traditional ones. Jobs such as, for example, digitalization of the tax system. This is a huge undertaking that's needed in order to enable the state to become a provider of the kind of social services that would be needed in anticipation of the various shocks, environmental, climate change, as well as health and pandemics and all these kind of things. And the states that are digitalized and capable more likely to be, relatively successful in coping with this. And this will open opportunities actually for job creation within the public sector, as well as the public sector enabling the private sector to do this. The case study of Kenya, I think, would be very interesting for our region. Kenya is one country that has really managed to
Sorry, Dr. Ibrahim, we accidentally muted you. So can you unmute?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we intended to mute Jamal, but I muted you.
Okay. I was just saying that as Jamal, the point alluded to by Jamal, I think, is that the universal social protection kind of role of the state, which seems to be gaining a lot of traction in the development debate these days, promises to open opportunities for jobs that are not, traditional jobs, but highly skilled and rewarding jobs. And I was just saying that the experience of Kenya is quite interesting, because Kenya has made significant stride towards a digitalized economy. Believe it or not, in Nairobi, there are 2 big data firms that are actually selling data to the financial institutions and banks. And some research is being done about the impact of this on financial inclusion and access of women to women-led SMEs to finance. And so these are all opportunities that actually will calls for a stronger role of the state, but in a way that enables the private sector. So these are the 2 points I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for these valuable comments and thoughts. I wanted to move to Dr. Ali Faqih for his contribution.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
No, we can hear you, but we don't see you.
Sorry, it's I don't have electricity. How about now?
Now we can see you. Dr. Faqih, the connection is bad. Can you?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Dr. Ali, the line is cutting.
How about now? Can you hear me?
This is better.
Now this is better, yes.
Yeah, all right. I turned off my camera because I'm using my mobile. Thank you. If you can hear me well, thank you for your invitation. I really enjoyed reading this important report and this interesting collaboration between ESCWA and ILO on timely topic. To sum up, so the main question, I believe, is that what dampened job creation in the private sector across the MENA region? So focusing on demand side, we know it is also on supply side, we have employability issues that affect mostly marginalized group related to level of education, level of skills, and so on. But I strongly believe it's really interesting and important to focus on demand side. It's interesting to emphasize a little bit more on the 3 main restrictions. So we have the rigidity of labor regulations, according to a number of evidence, including a paper we did a number of years ago. Lower growth, rigid labor regulations across the MENA region. Second constraint or restriction for private sector is the skill mismatch issue raised by also Jamal, and this is really important, and it's common across the MENA region. And third restriction is poor governance or poor institution. So, and this will lead me to raise the following question: what can be done at private sector in the absence of a good institution or poor governance? For instance, I'm thinking of family-friendly work practices, mainly for females. Currently, there is an initiative in Lebanon funded by USAID through a MEPI program to help the private sector to initiate, or we know it's a bad time, we are going through a tough economic situation, but it's what can be done in the absence of good governance and in the absence of government intervention, how the private sector can initiate in order to attract females, in order to enhance female employment. So one of number of initiatives is to focus on maternity leave, for example, and childcare that attract females and to improve working conditions. So this is not well specified or developed in the report, maybe in a future research. So second, the role of self-employed females, so especially in rural areas. So currently you are observing some initiative in agriculture sector. I was 1 month ago in Bekaa and South areas. Here you are observing some basic initiatives by females to start up their own business, focusing on agriculture sector in this current economic situation. So this is also important to focus on what can be done for self-employment or self-employed categories. And the main issue at the end of the day from policy intervention is that investment in infrastructure in order to help the private sector to create more jobs. So given the current restrictions and skill mismatch problems that is a long run to improve, and rigidity of labor regulations that's common across MENA countries where it needs a bit of time maybe. So what can be done in the absence of governments? These initiatives that can be conducted or can be done by a private sector, mainly family-friendly work practices at a minimum level, self-employment for women living in rural areas. So this is what I have as remarks, for instance, on the report. Thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for the interesting comments you provided. We wanted to move to Ver, please, share, and then to Dr. Marwan.
Well, thank you very much. And let me start by congratulating ESCWA and, of course, my colleagues in ILO for this report, which has been said is very timely. And I think it makes a very important contribution to look at the issues around job creation. And of course, I fully support the focus on the demand side, as has been mentioned. This is something that globally the ILO, of course, is also pushing, and the need to look at the demand side policies in order to create more decent and productive employment. A few quick comments. Just firstly, on the demand side, I think the critical issue is what Tariq and also the ESCWA colleagues had mentioned, which are the buy-in, the political economy, also the role of institutions. There has been a lot of rethinking of macro, as Tariq has pointed out, and the role of fiscal policy, etc. But at the end of the day, the challenge is to get the right buy-in from the parts of government that make the decisions on the demand side policies, with a view to achieving employment objectives. And of course, the national employment policy approach that Tariq has referred to seeks to do that. But obviously the challenges remain in terms of how to bring on board the ministries of finance, central banks, etc., to support those demand side policies. So a question or more comment on on that challenge and how to bring those actors to the table to ensure that employment doesn't just remain a supply side issue relegated to parts of government that do not have a role or an impact on those decisions. Second point is on the demand side, and it's linked to issues that have already been raised around women's employment. I have to admit I don't know a lot about this region, but I've worked a lot in South Asia, where the challenges are very similar in terms of women's participation in the labor force, the challenges for them both, in terms of supply side issues, but also social norms, etc., in participating. And then the work that we've done at the ILO in South Asia also stress the importance of many of the issues that have been mentioned today. But also, I just want to link that back to the demand side, because one thing we've also seen in Asia is that if the demand side is not supporting the creation of jobs that women can access, it really doesn't help a lot on in terms of what you do on the supply side. So countries which have been able to generate jobs in sectors that are accessible to women, meaning they're also socially acceptable, and also in the vicinity, proximity, access has been always a really key issue. Then it's been very difficult for women to participate despite increases in education, despite falls in fertility, despite other social measures. So the question is then how to ensure that the demand side policies also put women's employment as an objective. And this is going beyond entrepreneurship, right? It's also the creation of jobs in sectors that will lead to women's employment. And the final point is on this issue of regulation and employment elasticity. And it is good to look at employment elasticities, but never in isolation. And there is, of course, challenges in using employment elasticities because they are very volatile. 1 year versus another, things can fluctuate depending on economic situation. But in particular, I would raise a question around linking regulation, employment elasticities. I mean, of course, you see countries with more stable labor markets, in Europe, for example, Germany, France, etc. They have lower elasticities because they're not the level of employment is not as being adjusted as fast over the business cycle because of regulation. But I mean, the issue is at the end of the day, what does the employment elasticity mean? And I think Dr. Ibrahim pointed out the point about low productivity jobs. So you can of course have a high employment elasticity, and then you'll be creating lots of low productivity jobs. So just maybe a word of caution or just a question around too much emphasis on elasticities and the need to look at the quality of jobs and productive employment, and really if you're getting growth at the right level in the right sectors, productivity elasticities will fall anyway over time. I mean, this is what you see in China and all fast-growing economies. So falling elasticity itself is not the issue. It's really where that growth is being generated, and that's also correct that you look at those different sectors. But I think just a small point, but it's just in terms of the interpretation and use of that figure. But thanks again for this opportunity, and congratulations once more for a very timely and important report.
Thank you so much for the valuable contributions and ideas. We go to Dr. Marwani.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for the excellent work. So I really enjoyed your presentation. Let me share with you a few elements of thought. So my idea maybe is how to be useful, how we can be useful, academics and also people from international institutions. A few of us have been working on these issues for quite a long period, and the idea is maybe to think in methodological way. So I'll try to share with you my thoughts about this. I think what the report did very well is to link many aspects that are not necessarily clear for everyone. Private sector development, structural transformation, the quality of jobs. So this is, I think, is really important. And as Khalid said earlier, I think now the fact that demand is really become important is accepted by most people, although most of them didn't accept it for a very long period. So while this is done, maybe now we have to move to another objective, and another objective which maybe has bigger importance to be effective in policies. So the idea is, once we have this bigger clarity in what are the stakes, so now the idea is, what are the tools? And when we think the tools, I mean the real tools, not just say we need to improve governance, we need to improve education, we need to improve environment and women and everything. You cannot do it this way. You have really to choose 2 or 3 points that are doable. And there you have 2 ways. One is, of course, political economy. So when we say political economy, for example, the case of Tunisia is very interesting. Most of you probably know the work All in the Family, where Bob Rikers and others have shown how the families take advantage of the countries, etc., etc. But there was a revolution and nothing changed, and probably nothing will change in the next 20 years. So we have to think in second best way. And as Dr. Ibrahim said earlier, Danny Roderick, of course, is very useful, because Danny Roderick helps us and others think about what is doable. And Tunisia showed that under these families, and despite all the problems, it could achieve growth with improving the level of export sophistication, etc. I'm not, of course, saying that we should promote this kind of regimes at all. I'm just saying that we need to think within the box of our countries today. At the same time, think about what could be improved if it changed, but think also about how it works today. And while we think this way, we can, for example, improve technology, improve whatever is easy to do within our today frameworks. And for this, I want to use a word that I haven't heard of, about all the presentation, is industrial policy. So we haven't talked at all about industrial policy, while for me, when we talk about firms and we talk about elasticity and the share of capital in comparison to labor, etc. We need to talk about industrial policy. Of course, it's not industrial policy of the 60s. It's industrial policy of the 2000s. And here, it's important to think about firms, not just about sectors, to think about innovation. And here, the research can be very useful. For example, in Tunisia, we've done work on which was one of the first, I think, in the region of assessment of the very large scale, the Programme de Mise à Niveau, for almost 20 years. So accessing the data was very difficult because they didn't want to show us the results. And one of the results was that the money was mainly used for big firms to help them get more revenue, not just, and the share of labor. So it confirms kind of what you found for your report. But this program was helping mainly the firms that didn't necessarily need it. And here, I think when we do industrial policy, we have to think about this. What kind of industry we want to help, for example, manufacturing versus construction or others, but also what types of firms. And if we show that the very small firms are not necessarily the ones that do the best, despite being the largest shares in our countries, we must not promote these types of firms. Also, it's a taboo, of course. Everyone will say we need to help SMEs because SMEs is the future. Here, our work as a researcher is to say, okay, here we found that it's not SMEs, or it's SMEs. Here also, I don't have any ideology, I mean, but research-oriented policies need to be implemented. And really, I think our role is to think about industrial policy and maybe come back to it. It's probably time, a new type of industrial policy, but I think it's really our contribution can be through this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marwani, for the great comments. I want to give the floor to our colleague Tariq from the ILO for his thoughts, and then Khaled and myself when we close the session. We're running a little bit late for 3 speakers. So, Tariq, could you go, please?
Thank you, Salim, and thank you all colleagues who have given these very valuable contributions and comments and thoughts. You know, not a lot to actually react to there. I think we're very much in agreement. I think what we presented was some of the higher level findings. I think one thing I do want to reflect on, and it's an issue that Jamal, you raised in relation to channeling career choices, the career guidance, and it's the issue of information, labor market information. And this is unfortunately a region where we're really deeply lacking in strong an effective labor market information, which is, we struggled with a lot in putting together this report, but we don't need it just for the sake of putting together reports, for actual policy making at the higher level, and also for the, for the channeling, as you said, for the, at the lower levels. And I think what we really need to do is to focus our efforts across the region on how we can better integrate the administrative data that you referred to from various different sources, but also there's a strong call for expanding the collection of statistical data through more surveys that are focused on labor market issues. That should be a really regular collection of labor market information at levels that allow us to capture comparable key labor market indicators, and to be able to actually develop our policies and to be able to then subsequently monitor and evaluate what's actually being put in place. And then also to be able to put these together along with administrative data into more holistic labor market information systems that allow us to draw on the strengths of these two different types of data, because they do serve different purposes and they do complement each other. It's not that one is a substitute for the other. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. In North Africa, data collection at the statistical level, should we say, is a little bit better than in the West Asian part of the region, where, with the exception of Palestine and to some degree Jordan, we have very, very poor incidences of very few incidences of regular collection of pertinent labor market information. So this is really, it's a binding constraint to a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the policy making, and it explains a lot of the gaps that we have in policy. Employment has often been just left as a, as a residual. And I think one final thought from my side before I hand over to Salim and Khalid, and a comment made by Ibrahim, I think, on the issue of the importance of the role of the state now, and that actually we do need a strengthened role. I think that's very much true, and it's very much the point. It's how it needs to change from what it was before. I think the issue is that the state can no longer be the employer of first choice and of last resort for citizens of the region. However, as we see this changing world of work, its role in providing a level playing field, right, and an enabling environment that allows businesses to operate freely and effectively at the same time as protecting workers and their interests is critical. And that's where we're really lacking the actual effective governance of the labor market from the state. And I think now, as we move into these non-standard forms of employment, and we have large cohorts of workers as well who fall outside of the realm of basic labor legislations, right? The large groups of migrant workers, domestic workers, these new non-standard forms of employment. This is where the role of the state becomes even more, prominent now and important as we move forward. So just a couple of issues that I wanted to draw upon. But thank you all discussants very much for your excellent thoughts and remarks, which from my side, I very much agree with. Over to you.
Thanks, Tariq. Thank you so much. Khalid?
Yes, I'd also like to thank everybody for this great discussion. I wish we had more time and energy here without the AC to continue on. And I want to respond to a couple of issues raised by Dr. Ibrahim and Dr. Marwani. I think on the issue, listen, I mean, this region is in a very unique situation right now, okay? When you look at the countries that are in conflict, I mean, this whole discussion about industrial policy and the role of the state and fiscal policies and assumes a certain degree of normal conditions, and we have 1/3 of the region that is going in transition or in a very difficult situation. So I like very much the thought that we need to focus on what can be done and what can be done with the given current situation. And I don't know whether we can achieve any of the goals that I think we all agree on without revisiting the issue of macroeconomic policies. I mean, how can you be able to promote a private sector when your monetary policies and your fiscal policies are going in the complete opposite direction, and for reasons that we're all acknowledging? So that we know. And I think the discussion has to start with that. At the very macro level, at the vision level, does the state really take employment, decent employment generation seriously enough so that it tailors all of its macro fiscal policies towards that? I think that in some cases, in many cases, the priorities are not there for that purpose. There are other firefighting issues that are more urgent from a political point of view. So, I mean, that's my personal observation. But however, even when you do take into account the current situations for some countries, like for example, in Egypt, we did an interesting paper a couple of years ago with the Ministry of Planning. And we said, okay, we're going to stick with the IMF agreement and all of the parameters. And let's say, as Dr. Ibrahim mentioned, let's say what would be the impact of one scenario of digitalization, and just looking at the impact of that and more absorption of skilled labor force and much more attention being given to high value added sector. We used the CGE model, and we actually found that even with the current macro fiscal environment, you'll be able to achieve a higher growth rate and much better employment and decent employment outcomes. So yes, there's a lot that can be done, but I still think that it needs a lot of attention needs to be given to macroeconomic policies. Thank you very much, and I hope we continue this discussion. Very interesting discussion in future events.
Thank you so much, Khalid. One couple of points that I wanted to talk about is the first one is the skill mismatch that Jamal and other colleagues talked about. So it's very hard to tackle the skill mismatch from the current data infrastructure that we have. So for this reason, we here at ESCWA we are developing ESCWA Monitor for this specific task. I think we have. What we are doing is we are using big data and machine learning to extract information from the online job market, which will complement other conventional approaches, such as the labor force survey. Up till now, we have 1.3 or 1.4 million observation in this aspect, but we're not looking at the jobs per se. We're looking even further. We're looking at skills, because jobs-wise, it might not be representative anyways, but we could standardize the skills in a way that we can definitely look on what are the needed skills, what are the demanded skills, and what skills could we have in the Arab. When we are coordinating with colleagues with Tariq and colleagues at ILO in this aspect in the building process of the monitor as well. The second point to connect with Dr. Marwani is that yes, we need to look at whether it's the SMEs or not. We are seeing in our analysis that SMEs are not working, not creating enough jobs, but we're all pushing for SMEs. Shall we push for better, as Dr. Ali mentioned, monopolies, or Jamal mentioned monopolies, cartels? We need to break these in order to let the SMEs survive in the region, or else we can't touch the lives of the poor and those who are vulnerable in order to create decent jobs for them. So this topic has to be heavily investigated. Whether shall we support large firms to grow larger, or shall we support SMEs to create enough jobs, and in the formal sector where they could be exposed to exports as well, and be more competitive. This is a question that is valid to colleagues. Thank you so much for the valuable comments that you guys provided, and hopefully we'll reach out to you and we discuss with you further contribution that we will be working closely with many of you. And thanks for the ILO for their expertise that they provided among this report. And thanks for everybody. Anybody wants to add anything? Jamal, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Salim. I just want, if Dr. Ibrahim Al-Badawi allows me, really to extend an invitation to you, Salim, to Tariq, to Khalid, to submit a piece to the forum, which is a column, which is a blog on at the Economic Research Forum, to really inform broader audience about this really interesting work. I would be extending a formal invitation to you. We accepted your invitation, so now I really hope you accept our invitation as well to write something, maybe more than one piece to the forum by each of you, and not only for this report, but really for other reports that you are really doing. Dr.
Allow me, Jamal, to answer that before going to Dr. Ibrahim. We already have the open invitation. It's the burden is on our side to produce the policy briefs, and I'm sure that
I would wholeheartedly support this great suggestion by Jamal, and as Khalid said, we did an excellent report before on inequality in the Arab world, and I think it would be great really to think about a panel as part of the upcoming 28th annual conference of the ERF to, as you said, Jamal, to enhance the opportunity for a wider audience. And maybe we could try to see if we could get someone like Danny Roderick, for example, to be a lead discussant of this report, to inject some interesting new ideas complementary to because I think Khalid, as definitely you are absolutely right that we have to deal with the basic things. But things are moving very fast, actually, and we need also to start thinking about the anticipation of the future direction of development policy. And so I think your suggestion is well taken, and I will coordinate with Salim and Khalid.
With pleasure, Dr. Ibrahim.
With pleasure.
We're going to definitely discuss it internally with our colleagues at ILO, specifically Tariq, and then we'll definitely get back to you on both invitations. Tariq?
Okay. So take your time and discuss it with the ILO, your co-worker, and then let us know. We will definitely leave a slot for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tariq.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great
Jamal,
day.
see you soon.
Thanks.
Inshallah. Thank you.